Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Soy yo, AC Quintero, and I wanted to talk to you today about how to incorporate student interest into the curriculum even after you have set your curriculum in stone. So, I used to struggle with this a lot, especially with administrators always saying, we want student voice in the curriculum and we want this and we want that. But at the end of the day, you have to turn in like your lesson plans, you have to turn in your unit plans before the beginning of the year. So I'm referring to September. So I can be a very literal person sometimes. And I'm like, wait a minute, if I've already worked all summer on my lesson plans and adjusting them, like how am I going to incorporate what kids want to learn? Those two things just did not compute for me. And so this week I want to share an experience. In the beginning of the year and also this week I want to share two experiences that really helped me to understand how to do this and how to do this without really feeling like I had to scrap everything and start over or just work harder, because as teachers, first of all, we're in a pandemic, so let's just recognize that we are in a pandemic. Second of all, a lot of us are teaching virtually, and it is like right now I'm off of work. I'm making this video because as I'm preparing my lesson, I came across the subject that we're talking about now, and I just thought like, oh, you know what, let me try to be encouragement for someone and just kind of share like from the trenches, as I like to say, my perspective and what I did. So in the beginning of the year, after I created all my lesson plans, our administrator, our principal, wanted us to distribute surveys to students and to figure out like what they wanted to learn. And again, I was like, but I already submitted my syllabi and this is what they were learning. Like, why am I changing things? Why am I working so hard and then I'm gonna just scrap things? So I was just like, that's okay. So I sent out my surveys and I read all the things that kids wanted to learn. And there were some new things that were not necessarily represented in the curriculum. So some kids wanted to learn about superstitions, some kids wanted to learn about legends. And I don't necessarily have like a unit on legends or superstitions, but I do have some flexible time in my class. And like in the beginning of the beginning of my lesson, I do a warm-up activity. And then sometimes I have story time. So that's really for like my level 1 students, but I'm getting up to the point where we're doing story time in my level 4 as well. So those are sort of two like movable parts. And number one, I guess that's kind of my point, is one way to incorporate student voice is after you've administered your surveys and you've collected some of their ideas, don't necessarily change your curriculum. What you can do is just make little tiny adjustments and use those flexible parts to incorporate whatever students want to learn about. So with the superstitions, I did two things. It was superstitions, legends, and then like cultural. They were just like, we want to learn more like cultural traditions. And so during the beginning of our lesson, we call it campanazo at my school, and I know some schools call it campanada. I incorporated we did la celebración de Yipao, which is a Colombian celebration. It's like a Jeep celebration where like all the farmers, they pretty much put like their cornucopia of sorry, that was Siri. They put their cornucopia of like crops on these Jeeps, and then they just kind of parade them through town. And I just thought that was a really cool cultural tradition, and I added that to my campanazo. I gave them a video. I just had like a few questions, and then there was something else. I think I gave them a choice. And students just felt like, oh my gosh, yes, she took into consideration, my voice and kind of like my ideas and what I want to learn. Another way I incorporated superstitions is right around the time of Halloween, I wrote a short story called El Chico Misterioso. And prior to reading it, since it was kind of like about a vampire, and if you're familiar with the chupacabra, like they thought it was a vampire, though some blood-sucking, animal. So I ended up incorporating chupacabra into the curriculum, and we read about it sort of like as a pre-reading before we got to the story. And again, this was me taking into consideration what they wanted to learn. And just more recently, this was a couple of days ago, my Spanish 1 students wanted to learn about animals. Not all of them, but some of them on a survey said that they wanted to learn about animals in Spanish. And I don't really have an opportunity in the curriculum where like they learn about animals. I'm just like, Okay, like I just don't, like, I don't teach animals, like that's something for, like, you know, primary school or whatever. But nonetheless, that's something that they wanted to learn, so I wanted to make sure that I honored that and I addressed it. So I went back to my campanazo activities, and they had to, I gave them sort of a, like an icebreaker. That was another thing that they expressed, that they wanted more icebreakers in the class. So that their icebreaker was, if you were an animal, what would you be and why? And I gave them the icebreaker in English because it's Spanish 1, we're virtual, and we're like, we are where my Spanish 1 students were like last November. So we are kind of behind with all the virtual. I think everybody's behind. So, but yeah, they really enjoyed that. So they just looked up their animal and they just wrote their animal in the chat. And then we went through all the different animals and talked to them. They did Google breakout groups saying why they wanted to be that animal. I shared why I wanted to be, you know, like the animal that I chose. And of course, I shared in Spanish, and I use very comprehensible language, you know, like yo quiero ser un pajarito porque me gusta mirar, yo quiero volar. So, and I told them I was very chismosa, I'm very nosy, and I think birds are nosy. They're like flying all over the place looking at everything. So I told them that was my reason for wanting to be a bird. And it just was so nice. Like they felt like I incorporated their voice, that I listened to them, and I just think it's a win for the both of us. So, moral of the story is, if you ever do some type of survey and you want to ask your students, because I used to be afraid to do surveys. I was afraid to ask them because I was like, what if they say something that's not on the list? But I just got over it, and now I'm like, okay, I can read what they want to do. I can incorporate it into the curriculum. And when you do it, something I'm learning too, is I tell them that that's what I did. So if I do an activity that wasn't like my idea, that was their idea, I say, oh, this was something that you suggested, you know, on the survey. So I'm incorporating this just to keep it fresh in their mind that, hey, I am a teacher that cares. I want to hear your voice, and I want us to sort of make something together. So I hope this video was helpful in some way. Gracias.